This episode of Troxel is supported by Confluence, a small conference event for AEC professionals and technology providers to discuss industry trends and ideas together. It's put on by the fine folks at Avail. You can learn more about the upcoming invite-only events during this episode. This episode of Troxel is supported by Avail. Avail helps AECO firms better manage, organize, and navigate information faster. Visit getavail.com today. This episode is sponsored by ArchIT. ArchIT only supports architecture, design, and engineering firms at a price that would pleasantly surprise you. Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. This is the podcast where I have a conversation with guests from the architectural community and beyond to talk about the coevolution of architecture and technology. A little bit of housekeeping up front here. A quick reminder that you can support the Troxel Podcast directly through membership. Member perks include an ad-free version of the podcast with your own private feed, ad-free full show notes with links and guest bios right in your podcast app, and ad-free Troxel AEC Tech newsletters in your inbox each time one is sent out. Go to troxel.co, that's trxl.co, and click on one of the subscribe buttons to directly support what I'm doing here. Just know that I am grateful no matter how you choose to support the show, either by listening to the sponsored episodes or through direct support. I really appreciate you for listening. All right, in this episode, I welcome Scott Reynolds back to the podcast. Scott is a co-founder and CEO of UpCodes. He comes from a background in architecture, having worked for several years in Hong Kong and New York City at firms including both Cohn Peterson Fox and Hassel. Being a Y Combinator alumni, he has leveraged both industry and startup experience to launch and scale UpCodes. In this episode, we discuss UpCodes' latest product, Copilot. Copilot leverages AI to make the building code more accessible, and I have to say, a much better way to interpret and parse the code. I had the opportunity to take it for a test drive myself, and I have to say, I think this is a game changer. I asked Copilot about a project I'm considering doing here in my home in Oregon. So I set the parameters to the county I'm located in, chose residential code and the code year, and simply asked it what the requirements were for my project regarding exiting and egress. It answered my questions quickly and presented the requirements in an easy to understand way, which may be the best interaction I've ever had with the code. Today's conversation covers the journey of UpCodes, the challenges of democratizing access to the building code, and the potential for innovation in the compliance space. So now, without further ado, I bring you Scott Reynolds. Scott, welcome back to the podcast. Great to have you again.
So good to be back. Yeah, thank you, Evan, for inviting me back.
Yeah, I think December 2020, it was like lockdown time. Last time we were officially on the podcast together. So a lot has changed. And I think the last time that we talked, it was really regarding the lawsuit that you guys were involved in. Is there any update that you want to provide before we jump into like the real topic of this conversation?
Well, first I'll mention, wow, time really flies. I can't believe it's been that long since we last connected.
Right.
In terms of update, not a whole lot, actually. It just continues to kind of drag on. We got a lot of, I'd say pretty significant milestones in terms of wins and more case law. But these things always get dragged out. The American legal system, allows for these things to span over years and years. So we kind of push forward through that. Hopefully sometime in the future, there'll be some kind of, I think, positive, collaboration or end result to it all. But long story short, continues to drag on, unfortunately.
I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. You have been on the podcast a couple times before, and so I don't want to dwell on that for too much here. That the whole idea of copywriting the building code was kind of the topic of that conversation, and who should be able to or not be able to do that. Obviously, UpCodes, this is your livelihood, and you are trying to make it easy for architects and other building design professionals to access the building code. You're obviously doing a ton of work to kind of democratize access to that and provide innovation on top of that. The way people engage the building code, I would hope to make it easier, right? This has always been one of those things where it's like you go to the wizard in the corner of the office who knows the ins and outs of and they have their 3-ring binder and they're flipping through and they've slipped the addendum sheets in and it's this, you look at that whole thing and it's like, there's got to be a better way, man. And obviously this is what UpCodes is all about. And speaking of innovation, I want to talk about what you guys have just recently announced, which is Copilot. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, man. Like, give us the update and tell us what is going on with UpCodes and Copilot.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the lead in there. So just going back to what you mentioned, just free and open access is a huge pillar of what we do. And a lot of the previous years of development has just been bringing together this online library. So today we host over 5 million sections of code. So spans from building code, plumbing code, fire codes, accessibility codes, kind of through the gambit. And we're just bringing on more and more. But as you know, your background in architecture, I'm sure you know, that's really, really hard to parse. Historically, we've had things like a search engine, so you can go into a jurisdiction like Massachusetts, Florida, California, and kind of cut across that jurisdiction, the codes. But ultimately, it's still coming down to you to figure out what's relevant, what's not relevant. We do things like diagrams and educational content to help people through. But with a lot of other industries, we had our kind of eyes on these AI models coming out, the LLMs, which seemed really promising for parsing large data sets, specifically text. And I think those are expanding to more things like images. But what we are perceiving is the bread and butter of those LLMs is parsing text. And we looked at it and said, hey, this could be a really big opportunity for us because we have this massive library of text. Can we harness it? Can we bring that into the product?
Seems obvious, right? It's like you've got this giant corpus of training data, which is all of the model codes that are out there, different jurisdictions. You've already mapped what is appropriate for where when it comes to the different ways in which people engage the building code on every project that is probably a little bit different. And this whole idea of kind of augmenting the existing system to be more accessible to more people. Because, and this is all, like I said, we went to the wizard in the corner because they're the ones who had the expertise, the wisdom of working with the building code and code officials and kind of that handshake that happens when you submit a drawing set and specifications where they're working through all of those comments that come up ad hoc on the, right then, and how, because the building code does get interpreted by different people. It's not just black and white. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. It's like, it's full of creative workarounds, and like actually kind of interpreting the code is a creative process in and of itself. Right. And so there's so much going on there, and it seems like there's so much potential for a company like UpCodes or somebody else to augment the existing system to make it. And I know we've had conversations in the past where it's like, could you, and I think Copilot's the perfect name for this, could you make it so that you as UpCodes ask me a series of questions as the designer and then present some, a path to go down. And we've had some interesting conversations about that before in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much to unpack with what you just mentioned. So maybe I can touch on a couple of the earlier topics.
Cool.
So what you mentioned about bringing the codes together. So we just adopt or host the adopted laws, and that includes incorporating the amendments. So the interesting thing when you compare, say, like a generic LLM like OpenAI's ChatGPT or Google Bard, where we differ, I think, in a pretty significant way is roping in the amendments. So if you're, say, Massachusetts or Connecticut, and you have a separate set of amendments that get incorporated into the adopted model code, that kind of composite view of the code is what we operate on. And I think it's a subtle but pretty important difference, because it's bringing a lot more predictability into the codes that we're training it on and that we're bringing up as references in the answers. And then another point you raised is this kind of wizard. In the office, you have maybe 2-3 technical experts. Let's say if you're a 50, 60 person size company. And a big focus for us was, how do we democratize the codes more and more? How do we make it such that if someone's just joining the workforce, let's say they're coming out of school, maybe first position or a couple of years in, or you're jumping between jurisdictions. So you're working California, you want to jump into Wyoming or another state. How do you actually get familiar with those codes? Or a different project type. Let's say you do mixed use resi and you're jumping into commercial. How do we make it so these individuals can answer their own code questions? So exactly like you said, back in the day, you just go to that code expert who inevitably gets underwater with the amount of code requests coming in. And we see that role as being very, very critical, but hopefully we can alleviate some of that pressure on the individual to answer, across all people in the office's code questions.
There's other parallels in architectural practice that I'm familiar with that I think are all in this category, where it's like there's a couple of gatekeepers in the office who do this thing and they are totally drowning, right? And so visual people who are doing they're doing visualization on projects, they're doing the high-end V-Ray renders. There's only a couple of those people, if an office even has those. Most of the time they're outsourcing that. Specifications writers are another person role in this category, where it's like there's one or two. If a firm is lucky, a lot of times I think they're also hiring out to consultants. And then there's these, senior project technical architects who are the ones who are the gatekeeper of, and not in a bad way. It's just like that's the role either that they've chosen or fallen into, and they are being inundated, like you said, with every single team coming to them. And so by providing a tool that allows anyone, and so now in this category, the UpCodes category, I think of something like Enscape with the visualization example, right? It's like, well, now anybody can do pretty good renderings. And that takes a huge load off of the visualization team, because now they can focus on just the high-end stuff. And they have time in their lives now to do some R&D into the latest visualization techniques. Same thing goes here. It's like, if you can take some of the load off of those incredibly important roles of the person who really understands the building code, they can then focus on the really hard problems to solve, and not just the run-of-the-mill day-to-day FAQ style stuff that they're used to fielding from every single person in the office. So I think that this is, like you said, there's a huge opportunity here. Obviously, you guys foresaw that and are building a tool to do that. But I'm also wondering, just like, what have you seen as far as adoption when it comes to this thing from the rank and file people in the office, and actually successfully starting to navigate the building code, which is just kind of this, encyclopedic undertaking.
Yeah, and it's such a good point around the gatekeepers, or we might call them like checkpoints. And you mentioned a couple, like in rendering or QA, QC, that happen within a firm. But if you zoom out, there's also these checkpoints externally, like the plan reviewer or building inspector. So you have these very highly leveraged individuals who tend to get bogged down, like you're mentioning. Going to rendering
bottlenecks. Yes.
Exactly.
Totally.
So how do we empower the rest of the office to get it maybe 60, 70, 80% there, that these kind of critical roles can spend less time, but very leveraged time to do review, like QA, QC.
Right.
And a big focus for us is actually flowing that knowledge and information back to those more junior individuals from these kind of very senior people. So you have institutional knowledge within a firm, because if you work on a certain project type, you tend to build up pretty deep expertise.
Sure.
But that expertise can be very asymmetrical over a firm. So how do we take the expert in retail? How do we take the expert in commercial and help level up the rest of the office? So a big component for us is trying to capture those conversations, capture the code research done, so you can start to recycle and crib off of historical conversations.
Right.
So if you're a leader,
every architectural project is based on that idea right there. It's like,
right.
What can we take that we've done before and leverage that to give us a shortcut to get farther faster on this next project, because the pipeline and the throughput all matters, right?
And I'd say to varying degrees, right? Some firms are really good at that, really good at bringing the historical project and knowledge forward, and some maybe kind of let that slip between the cracks a little bit. And not by design, I think, just, because they weren't thinking about retaining more and more of that information. But I mean, I was guilty of that when I was working, trying to reinvent the wheel every time we have a project that comes in. Hey, let's do something new, and starting from scratch. But I think a big component of that is trying to capture a lot of those projects.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Avail. Avail is the content management system you deserve. With its beautifully simple interface, Avail makes it easy to manage, organize, find, and use your information. Designed by designers for designers and engineers, the Avail platform takes advantage of visual acuity, allowing for a visual audience to identify what they need in a couple of clicks. Avail is designed to serve any content type from any file location and allow for simple, fast deployment of your content. Plus, thanks to powerful integrations with Revit and other applications, you can seamlessly incorporate Avail into all your workflows. Say goodbye to the headache of locating and managing content and say hello to efficiency. To learn more, visit getavail.com. Avail, the information you need faster.
So tell us about kind of what this user experience is like with Copilot now, or maybe set the stage with what it has been. I think we've already everybody kind of knows maybe what it's like to flip through code books and try to find the sections and try to find it and then try to decipher it and then try to apply it. And then UpCodes came along. So let's start there with just kind of the journey that you guys have experienced over the last few years, and now a shift, I think, forward in the evolution of UpCodes with the Copilot product.
Yeah, absolutely. So where we started was aggregating the codes, bringing them together, the amendments, integrating the amendments, and kind of building as broad of a library as we could, expanding to different jurisdictions, like different states, different cities. And kind of, I mean, similar to like cracking open a book or a PDF or something like that, you're still diving, pretty deep into the code. Now we brought things like search, and you can start to cut through very, very rapidly through different things, but you're...
Imagine that. Yeah.
Right.
Searching the building code. Incredible.
And I mean, I guess this gets into a different topic, but there's been so little innovation, especially in the code space and compliance space. That's really what we're trying to lean into.
Well, because people actively avoid it. I mean, to me, the behaviors that surround the building code and just kind of the lore and the legend and all, it's not one of those things that you get trained in school as an architect to really dive into. It's always you're aware it exists. People will bring it up during critiques and juries. Oh yeah, you need more than one exit in that room, kind of a thing. But it's always in passing. And then you get to a real project, and it's like, now we are responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of the inhabitants of these buildings as licensed or registered architects, and like this is real. This is the real deal now. And then there's this giant book that you're staring at on the counter, and just surfacing the information that you need for your project in your jurisdiction, in this construction type, with this occupancy mix, and all of those things. It's like, what a puzzle that we're all faced with. And so I think UpCodes and the digitization of codes and what innovation could happen there just had so much potential right from the start.
And just like you said, that puzzle. So you have big books, you're trying to comb through it, and inevitably you're going to miss a section, a more stringent section that might exist in a different chapter or different book. So going back to your question about, what was the previous landscape? What does it look like now? For us, AI and Copilot is kind of a new portal into those codes. So it, in a much more intelligent way, can parse through all these different codes in very plain English, give you an overview. And if it's simple enough, maybe it gives you the answer. But at the very least, it's going to start to point you out to the right places and brings that code section into the answer. And that was a really big moment for us is when we realized, okay, it's not just it's not a black box that's going to spit out a code section. We're going to lean into the educational component. We're going to lean into getting people more and more familiar with the code. So it's almost more like routing people. So it brings together maybe, 10, 15 relevant sections of code referenced in the kind of plain English AI output, but highly encouraging people to get right back into the code, but in a much more intelligent way, in a much more kind of surgical and precise way of, hey, jump into the fire code here, jump into the electrical code or the building code relevant to that question.
Bringing that information to the user rather than them going down the rabbit hole and trying to find it themselves. I mean, I was first thinking, okay, the code is all about cross-referencing sections. And I mean, this is what the internet is really good at, right? This is what HTTP and hypertext, and it's really good at that. I mean, we've all experienced getting lost in the internet by following links, right? And it seems like an obvious application to something like the code, because the code is all cross-referenced as well, but it was all manual. But now you've just flipped the script, and instead of somebody going down the rabbit hole, you're bringing that information to them, kind of almost a recommendation engine or a suggestion engine that's saying, okay, you're looking at this, you probably need to look at this, you probably need to look at this, and you probably need to look at this, or you do need to look at this, and just bringing that to the surface right in the very beginning.
Exactly. And I think the really powerful part of the AI model is it can go down those rabbit holes, hundreds of thousands of those rabbit holes in a couple seconds, and then choose the end result of the rabbit hole, maybe 5 or 10. So you don't have to manually go down all the different rabbit holes. I think that's exactly it. Just the kind of scalability of the model to lift out the relevant information, just put it in front of you so you can make a better and more educated decision.
So I definitely want to talk about accuracy, and I want to talk, that's just something that keeps coming up when we're talking about like ChatGPT, large language models, training. It's just, can you trust the results, right? So I definitely want to get there, but maybe before we get there, I want to talk about adoption, because the whole point of democratizing this is obviously scale is going to be something that you're very interested in as the service provider with this platform. And so tell us like what adoption has been like by creating a tool that has innovated on the building code, because I think this could apply to more than just UpCodes and more than just the building code, but anybody who's working on a tech solution in AEC, because I think as a former head of digital practice in a firm, adoption is like one of the hardest nuts to crack in a firm. And people have to enjoy using your tool. People have to see the value. It has to be 10 times better than the thing they're used to doing. They have to see a case study to like prove to them that it's going to work before they even try it the first time. And so all of these things are kind of swimming around. I'm just wondering from your perspective, what adoption has looked like.
Yeah. And adoption, I'd say, is significantly more than we ever anticipated.
Awesome.
So my background being in architecture, and we started with a lot of codes kind of geared and oriented towards architects. But fast forward today, many years later, we have over 650,000 individuals on the site every month. So over 500,000 people coming on, and it's very, very diverse. So of course, architects, like I think, no, that is the biggest user segment, but it's GCs, it's trades, homeowners, owners, developers, plans examiners, building inspectors. And then some surprising ones too, like students or insurance companies. So it's a really, really wide range of individuals on it. So going to the adoption side, I think more than we ever anticipated was the kind of breadth of how applicable it would be to these different use cases. And kind of an interesting topic for us when developing the product is, how do you have a very opinionated product where you're building it for a couple of use cases where the audience is so broad? And I think what we really enjoyed about AI is that it can be very broad, and we can solve a lot of different use cases. So if you're a homeowner coming in, you're like, I need a checklist for my my deck or some kind of extension, or you're coming from a daycare center and you want to understand like what's the exit requirement, or of course, you're a professional designing a building. Those use cases are very, very different. Or for instance, different contexts, maybe you're a building inspector on site. and you're on your phone or your tablet. So
Mm-hmm.
not only different workflow, but also different form factor of what you're actually using for the product. So the adoption has been a blessing, but also like a challenge in a way, because
I bet.
you get pretty diverse demands.
Yeah, the user base is huge. I mean, when I was just thinking, I've done some remodeling in my house. I recently moved from one state to another, different code that they've adopted here. And it's like, when you're running a mechanical vent out of a bathroom, what's the diameter? What do they accept? And what you might find on the shelf at Home Depot is not necessarily what the code requires, right? And so
Mhm.
it's like, as a homeowner, you're right. I mean, that's one type of user that you probably didn't start out looking to, like, as a target audience, right? You start more with like this mid-sized large firm. I can just see how that has probably grown. Like you just said, there's just so many different use cases for this. And by democratizing it, it actually opens the door for normal people to understand how to access and put into practice the building code. I mean, that's just phenomenal.
And most of the growth and adoption to date has been organic. So things like word of mouth. So people sharing it
Mhm.
with colleagues, sharing it with friends, sending links through emails and things like that, or through, finding through Google. And that's driven most of the growth. But as a result of that, that growth hasn't been intentional. Like I know
Mhm.
other
It just
companies,
is what it
might do
is. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And at one point in time, we mapped out, okay, what are the sizes of firms from sole practitioner to some of the biggest architecture firms in the country? And what's our distribution compared to the actual distribution? And that curve was almost exactly the same as, what
Wow.
makes up our industry.
So
So
you have the perfect cross section of the industry mapped out, and the adoption, you're seeing it in all of those different kind of, I guess, horizontally across, which is what the code also is doing, right? It applies to all of these different scenarios, and that's pretty cool to see that.
And in an interesting way, architecture has an unusual distribution of those firm sizes. So it's
Right.
it's overrepresented on the small and medium sized firms compared to
Hmm.
larger firms
Right.
when you compare that against other industries. So it's and the type of work done by those different firms, varies pretty dramatically. So it goes back to that challenge of how do you build for all these different use cases when they do vary so much? And there's actually this very big representation on the small and medium, which is great because, I mean, this goes down another rabbit hole, but when it comes to user interviews and connecting with the community, it's really nice when people are so invested in it, and we can jump on the phone with sole practitioners and maybe 10, 20, 50-person firms, but then also firms that are hundreds of people big. But it does change pretty significantly.
Yeah. It just makes me feel good, Scott, that you guys have gone after this incredibly unsexy, ignored for the longest time problem in the industry. And to see the adoption that you are is really reassuring to me. And it just shows that we have to get the fundamentals right for the really cool stuff, I think, to even catch on, because the fundamentals are what affects the majority of the time of an architect and an engineer and the day-to-day life of those professionals. And then when they see the value there, I think they're going to be more open to seeing the other topics that we talk about on this podcast and that are going on that are innovating on top of innovation inside of AEC. So it actually, that just makes me feel hopeful that there is a way forward, because adoption, like I said earlier, has always been a struggle in AEC because we're so busy doing what we're already doing. And so it really does have to make a difference in the day-to-day first.
Yeah, absolutely. And exactly like I said, it's not a glamorous space, right? Code, I mean, some people love code. Some
Yep.
people get in there and spend, their whole day in code and
Of
absolutely love it.
course. Yeah.
But there's a huge percentage of the user base, or just in any firm, who, this is not their favorite part of the day when they're jumping into
Right.
the code.
Right.
And
Totally.
we're very conscious of that and try as much as possible. We call it getting out of the user's hair. And basically, when it comes down to the usability, the UI, the UX, how do we make it as streamlined as possible such that they can focus more on the code? The code
Yeah.
is so complicated. We don't need to make the tool itself more complicated to make their day more challenging.
Sure, of course.
And that goes through everything. So things like the pricing model, trying to make it as straightforward and cheap as possible. The account management, setting up projects, bookmarks, all of that kind of surrounding UX. We're trying to constantly make it more and more and more simple so that they can focus on the code.
Yeah.
And to your point about adoption, like it does need to be, 10x as good as what they had before. And I think what we've really tried to lean into is the net promoter score. So for the folks listening, it's just a way to kind of understand, are people enjoying the product and would they recommend it to other people? The simplest way to measure that is saying, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend this to someone else? And it's very simple, but pretty powerful. And through the years, we've always maintained being in 100th percentile in terms of NPS when it comes to software. And I think with something that has the potential to be relatively dry for people with code, that investment in UX and enjoyment of the product is so critical. I mean, I think it's always critical to your point about adoption, but especially in code.
You've provided a perfect segue. Let's actually talk about what it's like to use UpCodes for those who are not initiated on the UpCodes site. And then I think this also is the point at which you want to start talking about the addition of Copilot and how that maybe has changed things with the UpCodes interface, because it also could be that somebody has used UpCodes in the past and now maybe there's an entirely different way to use it. So jump into that part.
Yeah, absolutely. So to cover the past and what people might be familiar with, we've always leaned into democratizing code and putting it out there for free, and then building more sophisticated tools on top of that free access. Tools that start to automate, start to help with collaboration and project management. So the big difference now with the Copilot launch is providing an entirely new entry point or portal into the code. So instead of cracking open, let's say Florida or maybe Washington State, instead of going to that jurisdiction, clicking on the building code, maybe searching, combing through it, that entry or that user journey can be completely revised by starting in Copilot. And now you can say, it can start very, very broad, or it can be very, very specific. Now you get a text box and you can say, what, or generate a checklist for my egress, and maybe throw in an occupancy type, and a building type. And it'll start to spit out, okay, check out these 10 different sections, and it links out and references to those sections. So that's, something on the larger scope, or can be very tactical. Going to a building inspector, what's the minimum width of a corridor in a hospital, or maybe on the single family resi, what's the handrail extension past the last stair, and it'll bring up those sections, but also just answer your question in place.
This whole idea of natural language as an interface is huge. And to truly democratize something, and for someone in plain language be able to type in a request or a query or a command, is just such a big deal. Like, anybody in an office can now use a tool like this. Anybody, right? Anybody can form a question or whatever the input typology is. I think normally it's going to be a question, right? But it's like anybody can ask a question. And I think that's the most powerful thing about what we're seeing with all of the AI large language model products that are out there, is just, okay, what comes back aside? Just that interface, just being a prompt, is huge. And what you're talking about, to me, takes me back to the days of multiple search engines on the internet, like Yahoo and Alta Vista, which was a directory of information. And like you said, it's like you dive in one level and then that presents another level. And then you go into that next level and it presents another level deeper. And you keep going down and down and down. And then Google came along and completely flipped the model. And all you had to do was search for a term, and it surfaces results based on that. You didn't have to click, click, click deeper, deeper, deeper anymore. You still could do that, But the very first interaction was just the prompt, the text box on a white screen, right? And to me, I think it's really powerful to simplify the interface that much where it's just a text box.
And that freeform text box makes it more approachable by a wider audience and firm.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, I mean, using a really simple example here, but glass versus glazing, or the kind of the lingo that you do in the vernacular you pick up through years of experience, but now it's much more approachable. The exact phrasing matters a little bit less when you're starting. Now, the phrasing will matter a lot, of course, like when you're getting to the code. But for us, if you're saying a guardrail versus handrail or different concepts and you don't phrase it quite right, it has a lot of buffer to still get the answer right. Like you can, it provides a lot more ability to parse messiness in the query. I guess a wider funnel at the top. So it can bring in more and more people from the firm. And on it in kind of related topic, like you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And you kind of mentioned this earlier before, but I just want to kind of circle back to it. But this chatbot actually has the ability to ask you questions back, which I think is a really, really powerful thing. Yeah. And now for the first time, for us at least, we're having a back and forth. So you might ask a query and you might say, what's the width of the corridor? Well, that varies dramatically. Are you talking about a single family residential home, or are you talking about a hospital or something commercial, and what's above it and what are the occupant loads? So before, it would be very, very hard to parse that. We would just have to pull up everything under the sun that could be related to that. And there's a lot related to that.
Yeah.
But now we can say, okay, well, you might want to look at these sections, but even better, what's your project type? What are you working on? Where are you located?
Context,
to have this
establish that context. Yeah, that is cool. I think that one of the examples you talked about a minute ago was like, provide a checklist of things that I need to pay attention to. I think that is so powerful, because that would be a question that I would go ask the wizard in the corner, right? Hey, do you have a checklist? Do you have a rule book for this kind of project that you can give me as a starting point? And now I can ask the software to do that. And the software knows about code updates, I would assume. It knows what's changed and how recently and things to look out for. And I think it could probably be even more appropriate in its response than even somebody who's been working in the code, because things do update and you can't know everything about everything. Like you just said, we don't know what we don't know. And so for it to bring that to our attention early is incredible. I think of other use cases that you could ask a system like this early on in a project. There's so many. It's just like, what do I need to be aware of? What are the code sections that people miss? I could just see there being so many kinds of queries in a system like this to really gain someone the experience they need right when they need it on demand, rather than having to have the years and years of experience, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not something that's actually happening either, right? Like you said, people are kind of avoiding this whole section of the practice for the most part. And this is opening doors to people having a better understanding of the code. And by providing a tool that makes it easy to apply it on their project is a big deal.
Exactly.
This episode is sponsored by Confluence. I've invited Randall Stevens, the CEO of Avail, to tell you about it.
In 2019, we held the inaugural Confluence event, which was designed to bring together the product managers, the technology developers that are working on the products used daily in the AEC industry, and put them in the room with the design technology leaders from the practice side that are actually implementing and using these technologies. The goal isn't to sell anybody anything at these events. The goal is to get a better understanding of what's working, what's not working, and what would be the best products to develop to be implemented in the AECO industry. We've held these 3-day Confluence events the past 4 years and attracted over 100 attendees. We have an exciting agenda plan for our annual event in October. The theme this year is going to be focused around AI and machine learning and its applications in the AEC industry. You can learn more about Confluence at getavail.com/confluence.
And on the topic of updated code, we update over 7,000 sections of code every single month. So
Wow.
5 million sections on the website, over 7,000 get updated a month across all the different jurisdictions. So it's very much a moving target.
Yeah.
And there are really good checklists out there. You can find, like, I think it's
Mhm.
Los Angeles County, and a couple of other AHAs have very, very good checklists. Challenge being they're very static, and
Mhm.
they're kind of frozen in time. Now,
Right.
maybe in a year or two, they could get an update, but that's a one size fits all static checklist that, tries to cover this large swath. The reality is everything's dynamic. The foundation, the codes underneath are constantly changing. And your specific situation, where you're located, your project type, occupancies, is going to affect that checklist.
Right.
So for us, we had a lot of user requests coming in for checklists, and we always knew we wanted to tackle it and make that kind of feature, but couldn't wrap our heads around how do we make it scalable? Like, how do
Right.
we not put
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
things that could just be a blog post? And this is starting to provide that way where it's kind of infinitely scalable based on your inputs. And for every individual, they're going to get a different checklist because they deserve a different
Yeah.
checklist and they need a different checklist.
So let's talk about accuracy here, because you're talking about something that is starting to get more specific around project types, and let's just say, for the topic here, that the checklist is, it's tailored to a specific project type in a specific jurisdiction. And so give us what are the, I mean, it does seem like accuracy is a potential pitfall here. It could give you the wrong, how do you double check? What are you guys seeing as far as accuracy on the output? What's the feedback that you're getting? Because if you have a young emerging professional using a tool like this, I think the natural inclination is to accept it as the answer. Whereas like somebody who's been practicing for 30 years might say, oh, I would never do this. It missed this, kind of a thing. And is there a way to then like reinforce the model with additional training based on that experience that does exist out there?
Yeah, and just to zoom out a little bit, there is a site you can look at. I think Washington Post might have posted the article, but you can see what data went into train ChatGPT from OpenAI and Google
How
Bard.
did they find that out? I don't think that they published that themselves, did they? I mean, OpenAI didn't, but it sounds like some investigative reporting happened here.
So it was actually a third party who provided the data.
Okay.
So it's called Common Crawl C4 dataset. And Common Crawl, just like it sounds, they go around the internet and they scrape and they bring together massive, massive data sets, kind of like Google search would do for its search results.
Mm-hmm.
They comb the internet, pull it together into a huge data set, and that's the data set that went on to train ChatGPT and Google Bard. Now, Common Crawl actually offers a way to see what websites have been scraped. So we went in there, didn't really know what to expect. We said, did our data contribute to these models? And as it turns out, we're in the top 0.01% of websites that contribute data. So
Wow.
I forgot how many millions of tokens we contributed to it, but a lot of the laws and the content we host, it was very, very substantive in terms of training these models.
I would imagine this plays back into that lawsuit we started talking about potentially, because it's like, is this proprietary data? Should something that is required on all projects be considered proprietary data that no one else has access to? And so using it as training data, I mean, I've at least thought about it. I don't think we've talked about it on this podcast before, but the whole ethical side of what the training data is, where it's coming from, what's their permission, all of those things. I mean, obviously there's a lot going on that side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the I guess from our perspective, all of these adopted codes enter law, and fortunately, all the case law and the judges have come down on the same side to kind of firmly put that into the public domain. So when we're looking at these LLMs and more generic AIs, it's actually high quality data, like the American laws, that are actually training it, along with a lot of other things. And the other areas that are not, let's say like law, I think that is a really interesting topic, right? Like what goes into these models. And to kind of circle back to the question about accuracy, so we have the codes we host, and they're out there, for free and in the public, but then we incorporate other information to give those answers. In addition to setting up filters. So when you're jumping into a question, we can start to fence in around the right up-to-date data, because these generic LLMs have a snapshot. I think it was probably roughly the last time we spoke in 2021, I believe was the last snapshot they took. So
Right.
going back to 7,000 sections updated a month, we can say, okay, you're in California, but you're using the most up-to-date code for this answer. So now we've kind of constrained it. We've roped it into a jurisdiction. We've roped it into a certain time period. Or you can go historical. You can say, let's use a historical set of codes for different permitting date. And that's a really significant way to increase the accuracy compared to the generic LLMs. So that's what I was going to mention before is, despite contributing all this data, it was a snapshot from a while ago, and you get kind of older, out-of-date codes, but also just very generic across the whole US, where the reality is it changes pretty significantly, to your example about the pipe, piping size moving states.
Right.
So, and then the kind of another category I'd say is weaving in more content. So very soon we're going to bring in our educational content, the diagrams, which start to explain and unpack different code concepts. And then that becomes yet another kind of source of information that we can feed into the AI response.
Yeah, the new features that are showing up in what OpenAI is talking about, where they draw a diagram, feed it into the system, and it makes a working website off of a really poor napkin sketch of a website, right? It's like I could see application of things like this in architecture, right? Where somebody can draw a very simple diagram and feed it into the system and have that be the basis of search results, but also like you're talking about, like maybe potentially training data or capturing the wisdom of the individuals who sit in the corners in these offices before they retire, to apply that to the tool set in the office to make it easier for other people to get down the right track sooner in the things that they specialize in. I think would be absolutely incredible to be able to somehow do that. And so in which ways are you guys capturing or, like threading in the additional information? Is there a way to capture the knowledge of individuals and actually get that in there somehow? Is it feeding existing drawings or models or anything into the system to be able to do that?
Yeah, great question. So I'd break that down into two different areas. So one is the content UpCodes has produced. And I think we have now over 1,000 or 1.1 thousand diagrams that start to, unpack the code. And that's, available on the site currently. And that's going to add in a whole nother layer. But those are things produced by us. And
what
it's
kind
very
of diagrams before you move into the part two? Like what? Just give us a couple examples of what kind of diagrams you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So things like calculating occupant load. Like how do you do that? Kind of layering it on top of the code, giving examples, giving diagrams, a high level overview.
Such a big deal. Yeah,
train up awesome. And kind of elevate people's understanding of the code, or highly technical things like like an assembly or a detail. So here's like a fire rated wall. How does it interface with, say, a penetration or a duct coming through the wall? What does that look like? It's kind of hard to picture that when it's just a wall of text when you're looking at the code.
Right. Totally.
So bringing up examples and again, like diagrams or assemblies or kind of like line drawings, and then a plain English overview of what that actually means.
I think this is such a big you can't understate how important this is, or overstate, I don't know the right word, but it's like the aversion, because this is a text-based resource in a very visual field, is I think the kind of obvious observation that I can make right there. It's like, this is why so many people avoid this and specifications. It's like text, no thanks. I don't read books, I draw drawings, and I read drawings, and I talk about things in 3 dimensions, and I can just see the kind of misalignment that happens in our field. And so to be able to marry diagrams with text is going to be such a huge part of adoption, like successful adoption. If you can do that at scale, I mean, that just seems like an incredible, I don't know, like it just is going to unlock this for so many more people.
And it is one of our most popular features for exactly that. You have these highly creative individuals who are working in, at least 2D creative, but most likely in 3D creative. And then you throw a phone book in front of them and
Right.
expect them to go through and be excited about digging through hundreds of pages of text.
No, that's a
And
paperweight, man. Yeah,
right.
literally. Jeez. So I interrupted you. You wanted to break my question down into two pieces. Do you remember what the
Right.
second piece was? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's what additional data can you train the model on? And the first component of that was our own data that's going above and beyond the code to help parse it and train the model. But number two is coming from the users. And we're very keen and aware of the privacy aspect of that. And this, we can get into a huge kind of interesting rabbit hole about, other things like OpenAI and what does privacy look like there? Are you contributing to training their model? But the way we look at it is within a firm. So if you're, let's say, like a large, or it doesn't really matter, but any architecture firm, how do you better recycle that historical context, all the conversations you've had in the past?
Right.
And that's exactly where we're moving, is to say, you're going to utilize that. Your data is going to train your version of the model, or it's going to inform the answers for your firm, but not everyone else's answers. So you can be a lot more confident to put more data in there, and it'll be kind of siloed or have a firewall. So your firm will keep reaping the benefits versus sharing it. Now that's kind of where we're netting out or landing. I do think there is a downside to that, but it's kind of the nature of the industry where firms can be a little bit competitive with one another. They don't necessarily want their details or, their decisions to, disseminate to other firms. So, personally, I think we could benefit from sharing notes a little bit more, from kind of collaborating a lot like the software industry does. But at the same time, we need to kind of respect what the users are requesting.
There's a double-edged sword there, right? Because the whole idea of that being your secret sauce, your IP, when it comes to how you produce deliverables, but then at the same time, to your point, like you can raise more boats and make a stronger profession by sharing this information. I think about the HiPAR model, at least as it was kind of stated early on, which was like encode your knowledge into a function and then sell it on our marketplace. I don't know if that's gone anywhere in HiPAR, but then you could potentially monetize that as an income stream because you do have expertise there and it is valuable and it is useful. And maybe it's a very small amount, but at least then it kind of justifies the work that went into using that information for someone else's benefit, right? Like actually capturing it, actually using it to train the model, but then somebody else benefits from that. Couldn't you benefit from doing that process? Absolutely. And maybe there's opportunities there. I don't think you're trying to create a marketplace for firms with building code stuff, but it does seem like there's a lot to talk about there. And to get outside of a firm's echo chamber and have those kinds of conversations, I think is really important at the national level, because there are benefits to sharing that kind of stuff versus keeping it all inside the silo.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a good analogy in software development with open source. So there's a lot of open source packages, and they all build on one another like building blocks. And it provides a really, really robust foundation that when you launch your product, you can utilize a lot of these packages and you can give back, and you can contribute to existing packages, up level those. Someone else might come along and take the baton and run with it. Or companies or individuals contribute new open source packages. And it's a really interesting study because I think on balance, like you're saying, the rising tide can potentially lift all boats. And I think it really has in software. And it's a little bit of paying it forward, contributing back into the ecosystem. And I do see that it's a little bit difficult where your knowledge, your expertise is kind of what you sell when it comes in terms of architecture and design. But I think there's probably some balance we can do there where we are sharing notes. We're lifting the whole industry as by sharing all the notes, but retaining maybe some of them and retaining some institutional knowledge. But I do really appreciate how open a lot of the software developers are in terms of like putting things out there from small to big. Like even Facebook is putting out and Microsoft pretty large open source packages.
Yeah. Is your firm suffering from an illness common in the AEC industry? Mediocre IT support syndrome, also known as MITS syndrome. Common symptoms include not submitting a ticket because your IT provider takes too long to respond, losing access to your files and having to deal with the issue yourself, or not getting advice and guidance on the latest tools and software because your IT provider doesn't understand your business. When you're focusing on these problems, you are not working on your next big project. We call this quiet suffering. If you've ever thought about your IT support as it could be worse, it's time to shake things up and get back to health with your IT. It could be much better. Think about it. If your customer is building a hospital, would they hire an architecture firm specializing in residential ADUs? Why are you putting up with a mediocre IT service delivered by a generic IT provider? ArchIT only supports architecture, design, and engineering firms at a price that would pleasantly surprise you. Let them take care of your IT so you can focus on doing your best work. Head over to their website, read the reviews, review their pricing. Yes, you heard that right. They put their pricing right on their website. And of course, request a free consultation at getarchit.com. getarchit.com. Maybe nuts and bolts question. How are you actually, what kind of tools are you using to create and train your own chatbot? I'm interested in this personally. I don't know how willing you are to talk about this stuff. Maybe this is your own secret sauce, so feel free to just say no, but I am interested in learning how, because if a firm out there has information, are there ways that they could even start to apply this kind of thinking to the resources that they have to do some of this kind of training?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe because there is a little bit of secret sauce there, maybe I won't go into the specifics of our own implementation, but just talking in general, there are a lot of packages and tools out there, whether they're open source or not, that you can start to combine. And I think it's when you combine them is where you get a lot of the kind of interesting innovations. Google early on had a really good kind of phrase. It's combinatory innovation. And it's taking these innovations in adjacent industries, combining them in a unique way that presents a whole new opportunity in your own industry or your own space. And they did that a bunch with things like search or Gmail or Drive. New things came up that they could have a very kind of insightful take on those products. And I think in a similar way, when firms are thinking about it, what will help them most is seeing the landscape, keeping their finger on the pulse and saying, what can we combine that can give us a new opportunity to create a new tool? That being said, the landscape is changing so rapidly, like every week, right? Like I subscribe to like a weekly update for all the AI updates, and it's moving so fast that you do need to be very, very nimble in a way that you didn't before, because there's things coming on the scene every week and they can be more powerful, and you don't want to invest too deeply in something tool that maybe came out a month ago, because it might be surpassed in another month or two, and you need to faster than ever be combining these different tools together.
So yeah, another double-edged sword. The whole idea of getting in there and messing with this stuff so that you understand it is really important, because if you don't, if you hear that and you think, okay, I'm just going to wait, like this is clearly moving so fast, it's a freight train, I can't just grab on and go with it because it's just moving too fast, and whatever I invest in now could potentially be obsolete in a very short period of time. That's not, I don't think that's the right approach. I think the right approach is to dip your toes in, get your feet wet, and learn how this could potentially apply, because your subconscious will then take that experience and just start spinning the gears on it, and something else will come out and you'll be like, oh, well, this unlocks that thing that I ran into, and now I can take it further. I think one of the things that I saw early as a potential pitfall was train a thing with all your data, and then you can throw your data away. It's like, no, you're probably going to have to train another one later. So keep all of that information handy. Don't get rid of it, because I mean, every architect out there is sitting on mountains and mountains of data that they don't know what to do with. And so now there's potential applications for that. So if you do some training, don't toss the training data. You're likely going to have to train it again or again or again, or a different product, right? So a couple things to be thinking about when it comes to this. But I think it is important to get started so that you can leverage it when those aha moments present themselves, because you already know what to do in that circumstance, and you're not starting from scratch 3 years from now, because you're not going to wait any longer then.
Exactly. And just to highlight one thing you mentioned of, sitting on mountains of data, no one knew, but these mountains of data and data sets would be the gold mines of the future, because these LLMs that kind of burst onto the scene require these proprietary and or otherwise just data sets.
Right.
So absolutely don't throw those away. Like, there is tremendous value there. And, for better or worse, our industry has been a little bit guarded in terms of sharing data, like we were just mentioning before. The end result of that is that the data can be very siloed, but very valuable. So it's going to be a very interesting next couple of years where different people look to connect different data sets to build these tools. And I don't exactly know what that would look like, but it could be firms partnering, firms collaborating, maybe, providing APIs to different tools. So there's that component of sitting on these gold mines. In terms of getting involved, getting your hands dirty, building the tools, I would highly recommend that as well. And it's kind of like company building. You're most likely going to go through some pivots. You're going to start in one place, and you almost never end up in the same kind of trajectory where you started. You're going to learn things along the way. You're going to soft pivot or hard pivot from there, and you're going to be adaptable. But same thing with AI and a lot of these new tools. You don't really know how to adapt or pivot if you don't have familiarity and institutional knowledge of those tools. Right. So if you jump in, you get familiar, maybe the ultimate end product that you'll ship in the future is not what you started with, but at least you got started. Your team is familiar with it. They can start to pivot. They can start to change. And when that real opportunity comes along, you can jump on it much more quickly.
Yeah. So carve time out to do this thing. Like that, I think, is the hardest part for architects. Is like, instead of just being somebody who watches this happen from a distance, is to get involved and realize that there is a high potential future value in getting involved in this. Because if you strictly are just somebody who watches it from afar, it will pass you by. And I don't mean that in like you could never get started. It could be too late, but you will be much farther behind in the learning curve than somebody else. And the whole, that on some level, like, there's a lot of hype around this stuff, but you're here today to kind of talk about the value that it's added to the product that you make and that you're putting out into the world. And so maybe I'm not the right salesman for this. You're in a way better position to be the right salesman for this, especially when it comes to Copilot and UpCodes. Just talk about the value that it's created, because nobody saw this coming, right, Scott? This is one of those things where we all had this data sitting around because we're data hoarders, and we grew up in we saved as, we save as, we save as. We have all these different versions of our files for all the years, and the millennials can thank us later because we knew how to file structure and directories worked and all that stuff. And my kids today don't even know what a file is. They don't know where it is. They don't know how to, like, it. It's funny to think about. But now, because all of that data has been hoarded, it can be used for training. And especially in your case with UpCodes, being able to use that for a product that is available today. Like, I mean, I think that's absolutely, you're a great case study in kind of making the case for jumping into a tech like this that's just recently presented itself, and you're already taking advantage of it to add value for architects across the board.
And I do want to note that we see this as the early innings. Like, this is just I wouldn't even call it a V1. I'd call it a V0.1. Like, this is the very first iteration. And over the coming months, the coming years, it'll constantly evolve and constantly get more and more sophisticated. And our original goal is to be a tool that augments professionals and folks trying to parse through the code. Before Copilot, in a survey, I think we were around 5 hours a month we would save per individual with all the existing tools. And jumping in, starting to kind of integrate that into the overall product, I think we can move that from 5 hours dramatically more, maybe 10 or 15. So I think getting in there, seeing what it can do, gives you the ability to start saving more time right away or providing value to the end user, but then also helps you work with the end user to define the roadmap. And that's a whole nother topic, but I think really important, which is if people are interested in getting involved, you can do it within your own company, but you could also get on a customer advisory board or user research, or just collaborate with some of these companies or products working in the space. And we work really, really closely with the community. And, going back to getting it in their hands, getting it out there, it opens up that opportunity to collaborate, say, how can we make this tool better for you? And they get to see kind of how the tool is being created, they get a little bit more exposure, and then we can, make a tool that is hopefully a little bit more applicable to them. So, I'll just go back to saying it is still early days. We're really happy we move so fast because we're starting to learn and get so much kind of valuable feedback that's starting to queue up the roadmap for the next couple months. And then who knows for the next couple years where it goes.
The opportunity to get involved in the creation of a tool that helps yourself is like designing it with input from the inside, to me, is much different. It's a much different scenario than having somebody else from the outside who's not in AEC create a product, come at AEC with it, and try to sell it to AEC. There's a totally different landscape of like solving this for us, by us being the community that you're talking about, I think is super valuable. And for you to be so accessible and available and wanting of that is a testament to the kind of company that you are. And I think that should matter to architects, and they should see that there is value in that collaboration and that partnership to make tools for our industry to make it better. I think that's something worth repeating.
It always blows me away. We'll jump on a call, and one of the very first things we say is, okay, this tool is for you. How can we change the tool or better create this tool or modify it to make your day easier? What exactly would you like to see? And don't sugarcoat it. Say, and it doesn't need to be like the end result, but just talk to me through your pain points. What are the existing pain points and which ones are worse than others? And the surprising part is the reaction to that question. And clearly, they've never seen it before, or B, rarely heard it. So there's a lot of a shock when we first jump into these calls, and it's like, whoa, like, I've never been asked that before, but like, let me think out loud and I'll list these things. And it's so beneficial. And that is the end result. Like the only ambition here is to make that tool as valuable and as helpful for you as the end user is possible. And the only way to do that, to keep your finger on the pulse of what people want, is just simply ask them, what do you want? And It's so simple, but so few people do it. It's just kind of astounding to us. And how simple of a process, but valuable that is.
Well, I appreciate your ambition. This has been a fantastic conversation. And is there anything else that you want to put out there on this episode to point people toward, or any topics that we haven't quite gotten out in this conversation that you think are worth wrapping up with?
I think we covered all the major topics there. And I would just encourage people to get on there and, reach out with feedback and just engagement, no matter what component of the product or adjacent spaces. Like, we're always looking to iterate and improve the core product, Copilot, of course, which just launched, but also like the diagrams we were talking about before, or the code calculators and things like that. We're just constantly kind of shaping and improving it, but also looking in other spaces, other things we might tackle in the next couple quarters. So yeah, I would just highly encourage, whether it's reaching out to us at UpCodes or any of the companies in the software world in AEC. It's a very small world. There's only a handful of companies working to make software for architects. So I think just getting involved, connecting with them, speaking with them, and just making it a much more collaborative effort will, I think, help everybody in the space.
Yeah. Great. Well, I appreciate the conversation today, Scott. This has been fantastic, and I look forward to what you guys come up with next.
Great. And so good to connect again, and looking forward to staying in touch.
Right.
Thanks to our sponsors, and thanks to our members this week. Find out how you can become a member at trxl.co. And I'll talk to you again next week.